Hello everyone, welcome back to the Tiny Fibre Studio podcast. Yes, it's a podcast episode. I haven't done one in a while, but it's back. For those of you who are new, welcome. I'm glad you found me. Pull up a chair, make a tea, coffee, whatever your preference is, and we will sit and talk about some knitting stuff. For anybody who's a returning viewer, thank you very much for coming back. You will know that it has been quite some time since I did a podcast episode last. That's mostly because I just haven't really felt like I had a lot to talk about. But a viewer prompted me a couple of weeks ago on Instagram, and Sarah, thank you very much for the prompt, said, are you going to do another podcast episode soon? And my initial reaction was, I don't really think I've got a lot to talk about. But actually, when I sat down and thought about it, I thought, yeah, actually, I probably do. So let's do a podcast episode. Because it's been so hot in the UK over the summer, we had that huge heat wave, and I think that kind of put me off knitting for a little while, along with some other stuff that happened with various projects that I'll talk about in a moment. But because the weather is now starting to get that little bit cooler and the kittens have calmed down, they're no longer kittens, they're officially cats now. They've calmed down enough for me to start knitting in the evenings again. So I think I'm kind of getting there. I'm getting my knitting mojo back a little bit. So let's start off with talking about a very long-term project called the Doodler. If you've been watching this podcast for a while, you will remember that back in episode maybe 2 or 3, I dyed the fibre for that one, and then I spun the fibre into a singles yarn, and I started knitting it quite some time ago. Well, I finished it. There is a bit more of a story to it than that though. So keep in mind that I had dyed the fibre myself using the same amount of citric acid that I always use to fix the dye. I had spun it myself and I had rinsed it, and every time I rinsed it, the water was clear. Some of you will know where this is going already. And when I soaked the project ready for blocking, I used some synthropol in that first soak. So in theory, nothing should have happened, right? Wrong. Let me show you what happened. This is what happened. I think you can probably see that there is a little bit of dye bleed. When I say a little bit, I mean quite a lot. It's all over the light grey sections of this shawl, which is pretty annoying. There is one photo of it with Dexter helpfully posing on top of it immediately after I'd finished. But yeah, it's annoying. It's very annoying, especially because I did all of the things that it's very wise to do when you're working with multiple colours. I don't know what happened. I honestly don't. So it's annoying, but it is what it is. I've got enough of the light grey yarn to be able to completely reknit it, which I probably will do at some stage. I would have to frog the yellow sections and reuse those yellow sections. I think I should also have enough to be able to use the dark grey, kind of slaty dark grey at the top. I should be able to reknit that from what I have left over, but if not, I could certainly frog this and at least use this for the bind off if I don't have enough of the dark grey to do the whole thing. Interestingly though, I would actually make a bit of a change because this has literally just come out of the drawer after probably a couple of months of being finished, and it's actually quite small. So I think when I do reknit it, I will go up a couple of needle sizes because it actually feels quite sort of close now, where I kind of feel like it should be quite an open texture, an open stitch. It's not really, it's kind of, it has fluffed up quite a lot when it's been blocked. So I will definitely be making that change when I do reknit it. So that happened fairly early in the summer, and it definitely really put me off the idea of doing very much other knitting. But then the Isolde MCAL came along. For those who haven't done an MCAL before, it stands for Mystery Knit Along. So the idea is that a pattern is released in sections. In the case of Gloamintide, I think it was 5 or 6 sections. And you guys know that generally Isolde patterns tend to work pretty well for me, aesthetically and sizing wise and all that stuff. They do tend to work. So I have done her mystery knit alongs before, things like Follow Your Arrow, which was not only a mystery knit along but also kind of choose your own adventure knit along. So you had multiple clues and you could choose which clue you wanted to follow each time. That was a very cool one. Those patterns are still available, and it's a cool pattern. You can kind of see when you look at other people's projects, you'll see how different the results are from each one. But this mystery knit along came along, and it was called Gloamintide, and the idea was to have a nice shawl to kind of wrap around your shoulders when it gets cold in the summer evenings. Although actually this summer it wasn't cool during the evenings really, it was still pretty warm. But anyway, I decided that I would do the mystery knit along. Hello Dexter. Hello. Kiss. Dexter, kiss. Dexter, kiss. Wait, kiss. No, just gonna chase Safi, fine. Whatever. When the yarn requirements came out, it was 3 skeins of speckled yarn in a gradient, and they had to be fairly subtle gradients as well. I don't have a lot of speckled yarn in my stash because that trend kind of kicked off after I started spinning, and because I now spin a lot more yarn than I buy, I don't have that kind of stuff in stash. I tend to buy for specific projects now. So I didn't have any of that in my stash. I thought first of all about doing a Grello one because you might be able to tell, but I'm a little bit Grello obsessed. So I looked into doing that, but there was nowhere in Europe that had 3 skeins of Grello fade, just anywhere. So I decided to go with the Le Bien Ami kit version. So Le Bien Ami did some kits for Isolde, and there were I think 4 or 6 different options. They didn't initially say what kinds of colourways were going to be in the kits, but they released in Instagram stories on the morning of the yarn being available. They kind of showed you which options were going to be there. So I had the whole day to think about it. And my initial thought was to do a Grello one, but they didn't have a Grello fade. The 2 that I was really drawn to were the Shetland fade and the Fury fade. The Shetland one, the last yarn, the darkest yarn, was really quite a lot darker. And I kind of wanted something a little bit more subtle, you know, without that big change at the end. So I decided to go for the Fury fade, which I will show you. I have to be really careful not to mix these up because 2 of them are fairly similar unless you look at them really up close. So this is Sentimental, this one is Fury, and then this is La Belle Epoque. Again, this one is a fair bit darker, but it's more subtle than the Shetland fade was. And I really like them. I like them as a combination. And so I thought, yep, okay, we'll go with that. Le Bien Ami, if you haven't come across them before, it's kind of expensive. So this is definitely a yarn that I wanted to make into something that I was really, really, really happy with. And being a mystery knit along, I didn't want to totally commit them to being that project just in case I didn't like the finished design. So what I was doing was, as I was knitting it, wherever it says break the yarn, I was actually just creating a kind of loop up to wherever that yarn got used next, so that if I was happy with it, I could snip it and weave the ends in, but if I wasn't, I'd be able to frog it and I would still have an intact skein of yarn. The first clue I was really happy with. It has some nice little details in there. Before I show you much more, because it's a mystery knit along, if you want to skip past the spoilers, then I'll put a time code in the corner here so that you can just skip to that particular section if you want to avoid spoilers. However, the actual mystery knit along is finished now, so if you go onto the pattern page and look at anybody else's projects, they will have their pictures on the front page, so it's not really a mystery anymore. But if you happen to be knitting it and you still want to keep the surprise, then look away now and just skip to the time code that I've provided. So basically, in clue 1, you start off with the darker colour, and the two sort of features are, you've got a slip stitch pattern where it kind of gets slipped up over 2 rows. So you're taking one of the colours, slipping the stitch, knitting a couple of rows of the second colour, and then joining that previous colour back in. So you kind of get a contrast in the slip stitches. And there's also an eyelet pattern that happens as well. The first thing that was starting to slightly irritate me, I guess, was that there was a lot of switching backwards and forwards between different colours. And because 2 of the colours in my kit are very close to each other, I was having to keep them very neatly organised in my bag to make sure that I didn't get them mixed up and confused with each other. So that was kind of irritating, but I could live with that because the whole idea was that it was going to be a fade. So, you know, I was okay with the occasional switching of yarn, but it was starting to happen a lot more once you got to this kind of middle section here. And then at the end of clue 2, you cast on this whole other section. And people were kind of like, okay, that's interesting. And at the beginning, I think that was at the end of clue 2, at the beginning for clue 3, you cast on an entirely separate section. And that was the point where, because I was trying to preserve intact skeins if I could, that was the point where I kind of thought, actually, I'm just going to hold back on this and I will wait and see what it starts to look like, because I don't want to have to break the yarn if I don't have to, and if I'm not going to like it, then I just won't bother knitting the rest. Anyway, by about the end of clue 3, I think, maybe 4, you could start to see what was going to happen in the pattern, and it just wasn't really what I was looking for. The finished shawl is a kind of asymmetric triangular shawl with a square in the centre. So you kind of knit 2 triangles and then this bit becomes the edge of the square that kind of joins them together in the middle, roughly. So once I'd seen what was going to happen with it and I thought, yeah, this isn't really for me, that was the point where I thought, yeah, you know what, I'm not going to continue knitting it. So it does mean that I have 3 skeins of Le Bien Me that are not going to be doing anything. So if you have any suggestions, feel free. I think what I'm veering towards is either doing something like Stephen West's Smocket, which is a shawl, but it's quite a large shawl. It's in 3 colours, unusually for Stephen West, because it's normally like 4 or 5 different colours. The other option is that I buy 2 more skeins and do something like the Hoki Locatelli fading point. That might be kind of interesting, although I'd actually really love to do a Grello version of that. So maybe I save that for Grello and I do something else with these colours. So yeah, I really don't know, but it just unfortunately wasn't the right pattern for me at this point in time. So it will be frogged and I will reset the yarn and find something else to do with that one. So that was that, and after 2 projects that didn't really work out, I was definitely losing my knitting mojo in a really big way. But in the last couple of days, I have picked back up a project that I've been working on again for quite a long time. This was a 3-ply Shetland yarn that I spun in different shades of Shetland, and I'd had to stop working on it because it kind of needs me to have the pattern open on my iPad the whole time, because it's like a 28 stitch pattern and it's really random, so it's not like you can memorize which stitches you're doing. I'm gonna try and flip this the right way out for you. This is a combination of Blank Canvas by Isolde Teague and the Pixelated pullover. So this is where I'm at with it so far. And you can see that we're kind of getting up towards armpit level. So I think there's about 14 rows to go before I get into armpit level. And the idea is that it's kind of pixelated, as the title of the pattern suggests, and that it's going to kind of do a gradient into white. So the top will be white, and then I'll also be doing the pixelation on the sleeves as well, which will be interesting. It's coming along. As I say, the only concern that I've got is in these areas where there's a lot of colour work happening. You can kind of see there's a dip. I'm really hoping that that blocks out. I have been doing it really loosely. I've been knitting it inside out. I've been trying to make those rows as loose as possible, so I am hoping that there's enough in it to be able to block that out. I hope. I found it very slow going on this one, partially because I'm just never happy with the way that I do Fair Isle. I haven't found a happy way of actually holding the incoming yarns yet. On this project, I've been doing one colour in each hand, so English knitting with one hand and continental with the other. The thing that's really tedious about that is that it means that for reasons of colour dominance, it means that the yarn that I'm using least has to go in my continental hand, and I normally knit continental and I'm a pretty fast continental knitter. So that's kind of annoying because it means that the yarn that I'm using the most, I have to knit English style, which I kind of hate. Each to their own, but I just find, for me personally, English style is very slow going and it just ends up frustrating me, quite honestly. I've experimented, so I have done holding both yarns in my left hand and just picking one yarn up and then the other. The only problem that I have with that is I find it really tedious to wrap the yarn in different ways around my hand to be able to tension them both separately. And if I tension them both the same, so in the normal way that I would tension my yarn, which if I was doing both of them would be like that, I then just find that I have to kind of reset that every, I don't know, 10 stitches or so, because one will be used more than the other, and then you end up with one yarn that's really loose and the other one's nice and taut. Yeah, I don't know. The other thing I was looking at the other day actually was there's a knitting ring which allows you to feed the yarns through, and then that keeps them separated. Because the other thing that I find is that when I'm doing that and I'm knitting two, if I kind of separate them, I find it really hard to keep them separated for any length of time. So even if I put them over my finger like that, I tend to find that after a couple of stitches, they will end up just right next to each other again, and I have to reposition it, and I find it annoying. So I'm sure if I experimented enough, I would find a better way of doing that for me. But I might have to try that knitting ring at some stage and see if that helps. My only other concern about this is that the white Shetland is a fair bit thinner than some of the other colours. So I'm hoping it's not going to be too thin. Otherwise I'm going to have a transparent top half. But it's coming along actually, and I've done all of this where it goes from the light brown to the white. I've done all of that in the last couple of days, so I'm quite happy with that. Hopefully I'm going to get through that to the white section maybe later on today. Actually, there's not too many rows left before I get to the end of that one. But that's where I'm at with the Pixelated pullover. So clearly I have started to get my knitting mojo back, which is a good thing. And then I was looking through Instagram the other day and I saw one of Nora Gown's patterns that's due out for Brooklyn Tweed. It's due out tomorrow and I need it in my life. It's called Fold Line and it's a sweater. The sample's knitted in a sort of white version of Arbor and I need it. Badly need that sweater as a sweater, and also using the stitch pattern as cushion covers, because my living room, hello Safi, my living room has a kind of mid-century theme. I'll mention something else about the living room in a moment, but my living room has this mid-century theme and I've been looking for something subtly mid-century in the cushion department for quite a long time. Haven't I? Yes, I have. I have, darling. So I will probably have to knit that as a cushion cover. However, if I do that, I will have to knit it out of acrylic because Safi still has a bit of an issue with chewing yarn. If she's left to her own devices, I will just come home one day and there will be a massive hole in the cushion cover. So that's not going to happen. I'm going to have to do that out of acrylic. However, my hope is that I've got enough yarn in stash to start knitting Fold Line. And that is this. This is Rowan Pure Life British Wool Breeds. It's DK, which is also what Arbor is. And I think I've got about 1,300 yards. So hopefully, fingers crossed, maybe, I might have enough yarn. I've looked at some of Nora Gown's other patterns on Ravelry in DK, and they're kind of roughly around there, like 1240 or so yards for a similar amount of cabling, but obviously the cables and stuff that make up that geometric design might take up more yarn, so we'll see. They haven't announced yarn quantities yet, so if I do have enough, I will definitely be using this for the Nora Gown pattern, because it would be nice to be able to knit this from stash. This has tried and failed to be a few different things now, so it would be good if it could just finally be something. So yeah, fingers crossed, but we'll know tomorrow when the pattern comes out how much I'll need. If I don't have enough to do it out of this, I don't think I've got any significant quantities of any other DK in my stash, or certainly nothing that would work well for cables. So I think if I don't have enough of this, it will either be Arbor or possibly Garthenor. It'll just depend on which one I can actually get hold of. What do you think, Saf? Yeah. Safi, what are you doing? What are you doing? Oi. Come on, there we go. There we go. Yeah, good girl. Good girl. She will try and eat this if she gets half a chance, won't she? You will. So yeah, I'm very excited about that one. I'm looking forward to seeing tomorrow what the yarn requirements are for it, and I will have to really restrain myself from just casting it straight on rather than actually getting on with the pixelated pullover, which is what I probably should do first. Are you happy, girl? Yeah, you should be, because I bought her a new toy today. I've had this Kong Kickaroo, the kitten version. I bought it when she and Dexter first came to live with me, and she paid it absolutely no attention whatsoever until last night when she suddenly rediscovered it and then was carrying it around the house and growling at Dexter to get him to back off and sort of claim her ownership of the thing. Weren't you? Yes, you were growling at Dexter. Yeah. So I bought her the adult version seeing as she is now officially an adult cat. And she went nuts for it. Absolutely nuts for it. Do not eat the microphone. Do not eat the microphone, madam. No, naughty girl. So yeah, she loved it. Was throwing it around like nobody's business. Weren't you? You like your kickaroo. Yeah. Other than that, what's been going on? I can't remember whether the gate had been installed when I last spoke to you, but those of you who know / care about my house and all the sort of DIY jobs that needed doing, one of those that has made a big difference is having a gate installed that I can basically use the side extension as my entranceway, and I can get in and out using the gate rather than the front door, which means that there is no chance of these guys escaping because they are indoor cats, but I'm sure their curiosity would get the better of them if the door was open. And rather than trying to train them to consistently stay inside when the door's open, it's just easier if I can go in and out of the house through the side extension. That was put in a little while ago now, so that's been in place for a while. My stepdad also fitted some of the blinds a couple of weeks ago, which have made such a difference, especially in the kitchen. So I have shot a couple of episodes in the kitchen, I think, but in the kitchen, previously there were no blinds there were just curtains, which is kind of weird given that the kitchen window is pretty much a floor to ceiling window, and right outside that window is the footpath, like the sidewalk, the pavement, whatever you call it in your country. So you had to keep the curtains closed for privacy, otherwise everybody can see into your kitchen. But they never really stayed closed because these guys would get curious and nudge them out of the way. And also because you had the curtains closed all the time, it was really dark in the kitchen. So having those blinds installed has made a massive difference. It's so much better, so much lighter. So the blinds have gone in the kitchen and the two windows in the bedroom, which also has made a really big difference. I think it also really helped during the heat wave as well, the end of the heat wave after I'd had them installed, because having those blinds closed all day really made a difference to the amount of sunlight heat that was being trapped. The window in the craft room has also been prepared for the blinds to go in, so that will be good. That will be particularly good because filming episodes in here gets a little bit tricky when the light is constantly changing. Speaking of the craft room, which is where I am now, the idea of the craft room really is to create almost like a second living room, because I'm really aware that when I need to just sit down and spin or knit or something, I like to kind of box set stuff that I'm really familiar with. So old TV shows, my favourites, Press Gang, my favourite kids TV show of all time, and it still stands up to me box setting the entire series. Red Dwarf is another one, only up until about series 5 when they brought Kachansky in. It was just like meh. Any of that kind of stuff. I just box set stuff that I know really well so that I don't have to really concentrate on it, but it's something kind of entertaining in the background. So I've slightly rearranged the craft room so that I've now got a TV in here and it's connected up to a DVD player, which I don't really have that many DVDs anymore. I got rid of most of them when I moved from my last house, but the important stuff I've still got, and eventually I'll move those across to being kind of iTunes purchases if they're not on Netflix/Amazon Prime. The other great thing is that IKEA just released their new catalogue and their new product range, and a couple of months ago I had measured, I've got this kind of alcove in the craft room, and I was measuring it to see basically how much storage I can get in there. And I've got a 2x4 Kallax, well, Expedit, but Kallax is the current version. And I was thinking, oh, it's a real shame that they don't do a 3x4 Kallax, because that would actually fit so much better in that space. Guess what? The new IKEA catalogue has a 3x4 Kallax. So that's going to go in there. I also need to think about having somewhere for the drum carder to live. And I'll also need to think about some way of covering that up so that the cats can't get into it and manage to scratch themselves to pieces on it. Most of the furniture, in fact, almost all of the furniture that I've bought for this place so far has been original mid-century furniture. So I have a couple of pieces from the G-Plan fresco range in the living room. I've also got an Urkel Windsor. It's technically called a serving cabinet, but I use it as a desk for editing. So I would really love the Urkel 203 two-seater sofa in here. I think it would just about fit. But there are so many times when I'm in here and I'm knitting and I've got a cat trying to sit on my lap, but it's not a very big armchair, so they haven't really got anywhere to go. So that's one of the things that's kind of vaguely on my shopping list. I also just today bought a new shelf for my G-Plan fresco sideboard that I've got in the living room, because that thing stores so much, but you don't really look at it as being like a big chunk of storage. But my knitting cupboard is kind of getting a little bit cluttered. When I was thinking about buying a house and I was doing a whole load of, Marie Kondo decluttering and all that stuff, one of the things that I did was to go around my house and make a list of things that didn't have a home. You will have things like this as well, but I went around and made a list, and one of the things was knitting project bags, because they were everywhere and I wanted somewhere to be able to store them where it was like, that's where the knitting project bags live. And so the sideboard, the left-hand cupboard of the sideboard, is the knitting cupboard. At the moment, it's also got a lot of my knitting and spinning books in there, but I'm hoping to be able to kind of move those somewhere else shortly. But there was no shelf in there. Originally, that sideboard would have had an almost full depth shelf on the left-hand side and then a slightly less deep shelf on the right-hand side. Both of the shelves were missing on mine, which isn't a big deal really. It was more important to me that the cutlery dividers were there in the top drawer, because I love my cutlery drawer. It makes me so happy. But I have today replaced the shelf in the sideboard. I'm just wood staining it and then it can go in. So hopefully in the not too distant future, my knitting bags will have a little shelf to sit on and they will be all nice and neat and organised, and I can keep that cupboard nice and clean and tidy. So yeah, that's a few little bits and pieces that have been going on in my world. I hope that this episode has been interesting to you. I'm glad that I'm able to just kind of be honest and just go, you know what, these projects didn't work out. Yeah. If there is anything else that you would particularly like to hear about, then let me know in the comments below. I would love to also hear about anything that you're doing, and also any recommendations for that Le Bien Me yarn that I've got left over that I'd really like some kind of largish shawl slash blanket schlanket thing. Any recommendations that you've got for that would be amazing. Yeah, I think that's it. I think that's all I need to say. So I hope this episode has been useful or interesting in some way. If it has, then please feel free to leave me a comment, little thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe if you'd like to be updated when I release new episodes. In between now and the next episode, you can find me on Instagram as Tiny Fibre Studio, and on Ravelry I'm Ibex. Hope this was useful, and I will see you again next time.